One word, that's all it took. Not a touchdown, not a trade, not a contract dispute. Just one word dropped casually into a conversation, and suddenly the temperature in the room changed. Cult. It didn't come with yelling. It didn't come with open disrespect. It came wrapped in a half-smile, dressed up like a compliment. But anyone paying attention felt it immediately, because words like that don't land softly. They stick. The moment it was said about the Sanders family's fan base, something shifted. This wasn't just playful sports banter anymore. This wasn't hype. It was labeling, and labeling is powerful. In today's sports world, loyalty is supposed to be celebrated. Sell-out stadiums, that's passion. Viral support online, that's influence. Fans defending their favorite player, that's community. But the second that loyalty becomes too strong, too organized, too visible, some voices in media start reframing it. Suddenly, it's not loyalty. It's a cult. That word carries weight. It suggests blind devotion. It hints at obsession. It paints supporters as irrational instead of invested. And whether intentional or not, it shifts the tone from admiration to suspicion. That's why this moment hit differently. Because when the word was used, it wasn't just describing fans. It was redefining them. It was subtly implying that the support surrounding Shedeur Sanders wasn't normal sports loyalty. It was something extreme. And here, where it gets interesting. Shedeur didn't snap. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't brush it off. He did something far more dangerous. He asked for the definition. That's when the room tightened up. Because when you force someone to explain a loaded word, the energy changes. It stops being a joke. It stops being casual. Now it has to stand on meaning, and meaning exposes intent. Was it really just a harmless compliment? Or was it a subtle way of minimizing the legitimacy of his supporters? The question hung there. Sports media has a long history of building narratives, sometimes uplifting, sometimes critical, sometimes exaggerated. And when an athlete builds a fan base that feels bigger than the usual machine can control, tension starts to show. Shedeur isn't just another quarterback. He's part of a family brand, a cultural movement, a name that sparks reaction before the ball is even snapped. His supporters aren't quiet and they aren't small. They're loud. They're proud, and they travel. That kind of energy makes headlines, but it also makes some people uncomfortable. So when that single word slipped out, it felt less like commentary and more like a test. Would he ignore it? Would he laugh it off? Or would he challenge it? What happened next wasn't dramatic. It was calm, calculated, controlled. And that's exactly why it mattered. Because this wasn't just about a definition. It was about respect. It was about narrative power. And it might have revealed a growing battle between athletes who understand their influence and media voices still trying to define it for them. One word sparked the moment. But what it exposed could be much bigger. The word didn't sound explosive at first. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't framed as an insult. It was delivered casually, almost playfully, like something harmless you toss into conversation to spice it up. But cult is never just a casual word. Language carries history, and that word carries a heavy one. When people hear it, they don't picture enthusiastic sports fans. They think of blind devotion, manipulation, extremes, something unbalanced, something unhealthy. Even if the speaker doesn't fully mean all of that, the undertone lingers. That's why it matters. Calling a fan base loyal celebrates commitment. Calling them passionate respects their energy. Calling them a movement acknowledges cultural impact. But calling them a cult shifts the tone. It subtly reframes dedication as something irrational. And in sports media, framing is everything. The Sanders fan base didn't appear overnight. It was built over years, through wins, personality, visibility, and a family brand that attracts attention whether critics like it or not. Their supporters travel. They show up online. They defend their guy loudly. That kind of loyalty is rare. But when loyalty becomes strong enough to influence ratings, sell jerseys, and dominate conversations, some commentators start looking for a way to shrink it. That's where language comes in. By using the word cult, the implication changes. It's no longer just a strong community. It becomes something excessive, something followers are blindly trapped in instead of consciously choosing. And that subtle shift can plant doubt in viewers' minds without ever making a direct accusation. That's the real power of a loaded word. Even if someone later says, "I meant it as a compliment," the damage is already done. Because tone matters, context matters, and history matters. In recent years, we've seen how quickly narratives can form around athletes. One headline, one clipped quote, one viral moment. Suddenly perception becomes reality, and once a label sticks, it's hard to shake. That's why this moment wasn't small. When the word was said, it introduced a frame that could have grown legs if left unchecked. It could have been repeated on other shows, picked up on social media, turned into a running joke, and over time, jokes become reputations. Fans understood that instantly. Online reactions made it clear. Many felt the word carried a dismissive edge, even if it was disguised as humor. They didn't see themselves as blind followers. They saw themselves as supporters who connect with the Sanders family's confidence, resilience, and swagger. There's a difference. And that difference is exactly why the word matters. Because in a league where perception influences endorsements, locker room dynamics, and public image, even one careless term can tilt the narrative. It can elevate, or it can undermine. So when that comment hit the airwaves, it wasn't just commentary. It was a test of whether loyalty would be respected or reframed. And that distinction is bigger than one interview. The moment could have ended in 2 seconds. A quick laugh, a polite nod, move on to the next question. That's how most athletes handle moments like that. They don't want tension. They don't want headlines. They definitely don't want to look too sensitive. So they let it slide. But Shedeur didn't. He didn't get loud. He didn't get defensive. He didn't accuse anyone of disrespect. Instead, he did something far more powerful. He slowed the room down. What's the definition? That simple question changed everything. Because when you ask someone to define a loaded word, the energy shifts instantly. The joke disappears. The casual tone tightens. Now the speaker has to explain what they actually mean, and explanation exposes weakness. The host tried to frame it lightly, tried to smooth it out, but Shedeur kept pressing, not aggressively, strategically. He wasn't arguing emotion, he was dissecting language. That's a different level of control. Instead of reacting to how the word felt, he challenged what the word meant. He forced the conversation into logic. And once the definition was read aloud, describing a relatively small group centered around a shared interest, the flaw became obvious. If that's the case, then every fan base qualifies. Every sports team has passionate supporters. Every celebrity has a dedicated following. Every movement has believers, so why single out his? That's when the power flipped. The host had to backtrack. The tone shifted from playful labeling to clarification. Loyal fan base suddenly sounded safer, cleaner, more accurate. And that was the point. Shedeur didn't just defend his supporters. He exposed how easily narratives are shaped through word choice. He showed that framing isn't accidental. It's intentional, even when it feels subtle. And here, what made it even more impressive, he never lost composure. There was no eye-rolling, no sarcasm, no visible frustration, just calm repetition. What does that mean? Bring that back. Let's establish something. That's not emotion, that's awareness. He understood that if he reacted angrily, the story would become about his attitude. But by staying composed, he kept the focus exactly where it belonged, on the word itself. That's media intelligence. In a world where clips get chopped, headlines get twisted, and moments go viral in seconds, the safest move is clarity. And Shedeur made sure there was no ambiguity left in the air. By the end of the exchange, the room felt different. The label had been neutralized, the framing had been corrected, and the message was clear without ever being shouted. Words matter. Respect matters. And if you're going to define his supporters, you better be precise. That wasn't arrogance. That was control. And in that brief exchange, Shedeur showed something bigger than quarterback skills. He showed he understands the game behind the game, the one played with microphones instead of footballs. He didn't just answer a question. He flipped the script. It could have been brushed off in seconds. Most players would have smiled, maybe cracked a joke and let the moment drift away. That's the safe move. Keep it light. Don't challenge the host. Don't create friction. But Shedeur chose something different. Instead of reacting, he paused. And in that pause, the entire dynamic shifted. What's the definition? That question didn't sound aggressive. It wasn't confrontational. It was calm, curious almost. But underneath it was something sharper: control. Because once you ask someone to define a word they just used, you take the power back. The conversation stops being emotional and starts being analytical, and analysis exposes intent. The host had to slow down, had to explain, had to justify the label instead of hiding behind tone. Suddenly, the word cult wasn't playful anymore. It was under a microscope. That's when the energy in the room changed. Shedeur didn't argue about feelings. He didn't say he was offended. He didn't accuse anyone of disrespect. He simply kept pushing for clarity. Bring that back. Let's establish something. Each response steady, each follow-up deliberate. That's strategic communication. When the definition was read aloud, describing a relatively small group centered around shared interest, the contradiction became obvious. If that's the meaning, then almost every athlete with a fan base qualifies. Every team has die-hard supporters. Every celebrity has followers who defend them passionately. So why frame his differently? That question didn't even need to be asked directly. It was implied, and that's what made it powerful. By staying composed, Shedeur avoided giving critics ammunition. There was no viral outburst, no clip that could be edited to look defensive. Instead, the clip showed a young quarterback calmly dissecting language in real time. That's not accidental. It revealed something bigger than the word itself. It showed that he understands how narratives are formed. He understands that once a label sticks, it spreads, and he wasn't about to let that happen without scrutiny. The host eventually pivoted. Loyal fan base sounded better, safer, more respectful, and just like that, the framing was corrected. That was the flip. In less than a minute, Shedeur transformed what could have been a subtle dig into a lesson on precision. He didn't attack the media. He didn't grandstand. He simply made it clear that words carry weight, and if you're going to use one, be ready to stand on it. That's maturity. And maybe more importantly, that's awareness born from experience. Because this wasn't just about semantics. It was about protecting perception, protecting supporters, protecting brand. In a league where headlines travel faster than highlight reels, control over language is power. And in that exchange, Shedeur showed he knows exactly how to wield it. He didn't raise his voice. He raised the standard. And that's how the script got flipped. This moment didn't come out of nowhere. The calm, the precision, the refusal to let a loaded word slide, that wasn't random confidence. It was built, earned, sharpened through pressure. Because over the past year, Shedeur hasn't just faced defenses on the field. He's faced narratives off it. There were stretches where headlines felt heavier than hits. Analysts questioned his attitude. Commentators debated his leadership. At one point, critics even tried to frame his relationship with his father, Shedeur Sanders, as something he needed to separate from, as if loyalty to family required justification. That kind of conversation doesn't just analyze football. It digs personal. Then came the smaller controversies that somehow became big stories. The backwards hat debate, the body language breakdowns, the tone policing in interviews, every gesture dissected, every expression evaluated like evidence. And according to some commentators, there were moments where reports mischaracterized what he said or exaggerated situations for clicks. Whether intentional or not, the effect was the same. a narrative forming around him before he could fully define himself. That kind of media cycle changes a player. Early on, it's easy to react emotionally, to fire back, to feel misunderstood. But what G. Bush pointed out in that conversation rings true. When you go through repeated scrutiny, you either fold or you learn. Shedeur learned. He started recognizing patterns, how certain questions were framed, how specific words were chosen, how a slight pause could be clipped and replayed with a different tone attached. He saw how fast speculation could spread, especially in the era of viral sports commentary. It's been said by fans online that those experiences toughened him in a different way. Not physically, mentally. He began anticipating traps instead of walking into them. He stopped answering just the surface question and started analyzing what was underneath it. That's growth. And when the cult comment surfaced, it wasn't just about that one word. It was about everything that came before it. Every time his character was questioned. Every time a story felt skewed. Every time critics moved on without acknowledging what they previously pushed. He remembered. But instead of carrying bitterness, he carried awareness. That's why his tone stayed even. That's why he pressed for definition instead of firing off a rebuttal. He wasn't reacting to one moment, he was applying lessons from many. In sports, maturity is often measured by performance under pressure. But media pressure is a different kind of test. It's quieter, more psychological, and sometimes more relentless. Shedeur passed that test by evolving. He understood that controlling your image doesn't mean arguing with every critic. It means choosing your battles carefully. It means addressing framing before it solidifies. It means speaking calmly when others expect emotion. The media battles didn't harden him into hostility. They sharpened him into strategy. And that's why, when the moment came, he didn't flinch. He was ready. This isn't just about a fan base. It's about a movement. Because what surrounds Shedeur isn't normal rookie hype. It's not a 2-week viral spike. It's not a feel-good underdog story that fades by midseason. What's building around him feels bigger, louder, more cultural than typical sports momentum. Look at the energy. When he enters a stadium, the reaction isn't polite applause. It's an event, jerseys everywhere, phones out, social feeds lighting up before kickoff. And according to league merchandise reports, his jersey has ranked among the top sellers, rare territory for a young quarterback still early in his professional journey. That's not just support, that's buying power. And buying power means influence. But it goes deeper than numbers. The Sanders name already carried weight because of Shedeur Sanders, a Hall of Famer who turned charisma into a brand long before social media existed. Shedeur didn't just inherit that spotlight. He expanded it for a new generation. He understands digital presence. He understands audience connection. He understands that modern athletes aren't just players, they're platforms. That's why major brands aligned early. Partnerships with companies like Nike, Gatorade, Beats by Dre, Mercedes-Benz, and Ralph Lauren signal something important. Corporations don't invest based on hype alone. They invest in trajectory. And his trajectory is cultural. It's been said by marketing analysts that today's most valuable athletes are the ones who merge performance with personality. Shedeur fits that formula. He's confident but composed, flashy but calculated, visible but measured. That combination attracts more than fans. It builds community. Scroll through social media and you'll see it. Supporters don't just post highlights. They defend him in comment sections. They debate analysts. They share interviews. They celebrate wins like family victories. There's emotional investment there. Critics might call that intense. Supporters call it connection. And that's the difference between random popularity and cultural impact. A regular player gets cheers. A cultural figure shapes conversations. When Shedeur speaks, clips trend. When he responds calmly to criticism, it becomes a lesson in composure. When he challenges a word choice, it sparks debate about media framing. That's influence beyond the stat sheet. He's building something layered: football success, business intelligence, digital reach, and narrative awareness all moving together. And in today's league, that kind of ecosystem changes power dynamics. Because when fans feel personally invested, loyalty strengthens. When loyalty strengthens, brands lean in. When brands lean in, the platform grows. That's how movements form. This isn't blind devotion. It's alignment. A generation seeing confidence that feels relatable, ambition that feels unapologetic, strategy that feels modern. And whether critics admit it or not, that cultural weight is what makes the conversation around him different. He's not just gaining fans. He's building momentum. And momentum like that rarely stays small. This tension didn't start with one question, and it won't end with one interview. What happened in that moment was just a flashpoint, a visible crack in something that's been building quietly for years. The real issue runs deeper than a single word or a single exchange. It's about control, about who gets to define athletes in the modern era. For decades, traditional sports media held the microphone. They framed the stories, chose the angles, decided which traits were celebrated and which were criticized. Athletes played, media interpreted, fans consumed. That balance has changed. Today's players don't just rely on post-game interviews. They speak directly to millions through social platforms. They release their own content. They build brands without waiting for approval. And that shift has created friction, especially when an athlete understands that power and uses it intentionally. Shedeur represents that shift. He's not just aware of how he's covered, he's aware of how coverage works. He recognizes framing. He hears the subtext. He knows when a word is doing more than describing. And when he challenges that, it disrupts the old rhythm. That's where the tension lives. Because for some media voices, moments like that feel like pushback, like resistance. Not because the athlete is wrong, but because the athlete isn't passive anymore. In the past, a comment like cult might have gone unchecked. It could have been repeated elsewhere, turned into a running label, maybe even leaned into for humor or controversy. That's how narratives snowball. But when an athlete stops the conversation and asks for precision, it forces accountability. And accountability makes people uncomfortable. This isn't about thin skin. It's about boundaries, about saying, if you're going to define me or my supporters, be exact. That's a new dynamic, one where the subject of the coverage participates in shaping it. Fans notice this too. They're no longer waiting for analysts to tell them what to think. They watch the clips themselves. They read the comments. They form opinions independently. So when they see an athlete calmly push back on framing they don't agree with, it resonates. It feels like representation. That's why the reaction online was so strong. Not because of outrage, but because of recognition. Many fans feel like media narratives don't always reflect reality. When Shedeur challenged the wording, it felt like someone finally saying what supporters often think. And that's what makes this bigger than one interview. He's not just aware of how he's covered, he's aware of how coverage works. He recognizes framing. He hears the subtext. He knows when a word is doing more than describing. And when he challenges that, it disrupts the old rhythm. That's where the tension lives. Because for some media voices, moments like that feel like pushback, like resistance. Not because the athlete is wrong, but because the athlete isn't passive anymore. In the past, a comment like cult might have gone unchecked. It could have been repeated elsewhere, turned into a running label, maybe even leaned into for humor or controversy. That's how narratives snowball. But when an athlete stops the conversation and asks for precision, it forces accountability. And accountability makes people uncomfortable. This isn't about thin skin. It's about boundaries, about saying, if you're going to define me or my supporters, be exact. That's a new dynamic, one where the subject of the coverage participates in shaping it. Fans notice this too. They're no longer waiting for analysts to tell them what to think. They watch the clips themselves. They read the comments. They form opinions independently. So when they see an athlete calmly push back on framing they don't agree with, it resonates. It feels like representation. That's why the reaction online was so strong. Not because of outrage, but because of recognition. Many fans feel like media narratives don't always reflect reality. When Shedeur challenged the wording, it felt like someone finally saying what supporters often think. And that's what makes this bigger than one interview. It's a sign of a shifting relationship between athletes, media, and audiences. One where players are no longer just content, they're participants. One where fans don't just consume narratives, they question them. For media members who have spent years controlling the lens, that adjustment isn't easy. Every challenge can feel like a threat instead of a conversation. But the landscape has already changed. Athletes with awareness, platforms, and loyal communities don't need to accept every frame handed to them. They can pause, they can question, they can redirect. That doesn't weaken the conversation. It evolves it. And what happened here wasn't conflict for the sake of drama. It was a signal, a reminder that the power dynamic is shifting, and those who don't adapt will keep running into moments like this. Not because athletes are difficult, but because they're no longer silent. It sounded like a joke. Don't let him be good in 2026. Don't. The room laughed. The tone felt light. But underneath that humor was something real, almost like a warning wrapped in sarcasm. Because everyone understands what that line actually means. If Shedeur keeps improving on the field, everything else multiplies. Right now, he already commands attention. Cameras follow him, analysts debate him, fans defend him, brands partner with him, and he hasn't even reached his peak. That's what makes the statement hit differently. It's not about whether he's talented. He's already proven he can perform under pressure. It's about what happens when performance meets momentum. Because influence without dominance is one thing. Influence with dominance is unstoppable. If he starts stacking elite seasons, leading playoff runs, breaking franchise records, the cultural wave surrounding him doesn't just grow, it explodes. The critics get quieter. The debates shift. The narrative flips from "is he overhyped?" to "how did we doubt him?" And that's what some people aren't prepared for. There's a certain comfort in questioning rising stars. It keeps them manageable. It keeps the conversation centered on flaws. But when a player backs up confidence with consistent results, that space for doubt shrinks fast. That's what the "don't let him be good" line hints at. Because if he becomes undeniably great, the leverage changes. He won't just be a quarterback with a strong following. He'll be a franchise cornerstone with cultural gravity. His jersey sales, already reported among the league's top ranks, could soar even higher. His partnerships with brands like Nike and Gatorade become long-term power plays. His voice carries more weight in locker rooms and beyond. And when that happens, critics can't frame him the same way. The attitude becomes leadership. The flash becomes confidence. The loyal fan base becomes legacy. That's how quickly perception changes when winning enters the equation. It's been said in sports circles that success cures almost everything. If you win enough, the noise fades, the labels disappear, the debates lose steam. So when someone jokingly says, "Don't let him be good," what they're really admitting is this: if he reaches that next level, the conversation shifts permanently. And here's the twist. He seems aware of that trajectory. He's building on multiple fronts, sharpening communication, expanding business ventures, strengthening brand identity. That's not accidental. That's preparation. It suggests he's planning for longevity, not just moments. So the warning isn't really about 2026 specifically. It's about potential. Because if talent, awareness, and cultural momentum continue aligning, the league won't just be dealing with a promising quarterback. It'll be dealing with a fully realized force, on the field and off. And once that version arrives, there won't be much left to debate. Only results.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.